Welcome to the studio review for the Chapter 6 studio on unit testing. We are going to take a look at this balanced brackets project that's provided by Launch Code. They tell you can find this in your Java Web Dev projects repository. It's already there. So we come over here, we take a look at the unit testing folder, and we see there's a studio folder, and inside that is a balanced brackets project. And it's a Gradle build. Has a source folder in it, and inside of that, of course, is main and test. So, you may remember from lecture that when you're coming up with your files, you always want to have a parallel structure. And so, just like there's a balanced brackets class here, we're going to have a balanced brackets test class where all the tests will be written. So they tell you that you need to find the errors in the existing code, and you can write up, you should write up to at least 12 tests. And the content is kind of up to you. And so we're going to kind of look at what the problem is and then think about, what are the tests we're going to write. Okay, so they tell us that there's, one test here that they're giving us to help us get started, that we want to assert that brackets in the correct order return true. So in order to understand what this is all about, we really need to take a look at the original class here for balanced brackets. And it says it should return true if and only if the input string has a set of balanced brackets. So you opening and closing brackets have to happen in that order, and they can't be misnested. And they're talking about square brackets. So the string can contain non-bracket characters, but we're interested in just checking for those brackets and making sure they're not in the wrong order. So they give us some examples of strings here that can have balanced brackets, strings that have unbalanced brackets, and say that, this parameter string is the one that's to be validated, that's passed into this method. And this is a static method. We can call it directly on the class from the other file. And they've gotten us started with a little, algorithm that basically just says, okay, we're going to start off with brackets, the number of brackets having counted being 0. And then we're going to loop through every character, an array of characters, from that string, and look at one character at a time. If we come across an opening bracket, we'll increase the brackets count. And if we come across a closing brackets, we decrease it. And in theory, you open, you close, you open and close, no matter how many times that happens, in the end, if you are all the way back down to 0 because they've canceled each other out, then that's going to return true. And if they haven't canceled each other out, it's going to turn false. So this solution is fine for most cases, but we are going to discover as we write tests that it is not going to work for all of them. And that's where we want to come back and refactor our code as we find our test failing. So they remind us here, and I said this just a second ago, but because the method is static, we're not going to create an instance of balanced brackets. We're just going to be calling this has balanced brackets method directly on the class. So part of what you want to do is think through what are the different ways we could test this, right? And since they give us some examples here, we can definitely use some of these, these positive cases. We've got here some negative cases, and then we probably also want to think through some edge cases, things that are unlikely, but if they happen, does the code still work? So in my test file down here in the test folder, I've come up with a number of to-dos to kind of represent all these. Now, first of all, I've already taken the kind of empty tests they had here before and replaced it with the one that they provided here in the instructions. But I've decided that I want to refactor it further, because something that I taught in my lecture is that you can really improve the quality of your test by taking advantage of the message parameter in these assertion methods. So I'm going to create a message that makes, it spells out exactly what this test is testing for. So I'm going to say a single set of balanced brackets returns true. So I've given it a new name. I've said only brackets, I'm sorry, they gave it a name, only brackets returns true, which is fine. And then, but I'm just making this message that is much more specific. And it also means if I pass this into this assertion, so let's say that, this is our test data, we're passing it into has balanced brackets, we're calling it unbalanced brackets. So this is going to be, the return value of this method call with that being passed in. We're going to say we're asserting that this is true, and I'm going to put a comma here and have a second argument message. And that way, if the test were to fail, we would see that message as part of the failure report in the result. Okay, so we can go ahead and we can run this. Now, you can run unit tests. You can run everything in the class from up here if you want. You can also run a single test at a time just by running it right here. I'm just going to run this one for now. That's fine. And here we have the passing test. So, so far so good. Our code works. If we wanted to test what this looks like, if it was breaking, we could say, something like, return brackets is not equal to 0 or something, and we can run it again and then see it fail. Yeah, there you go. And notice that my message is right here. A single set of balanced brackets returns true. And then it says it expected true, but it was actually false. You can click to see the difference and see true is the expected value. The actual is false. So this is, how useful it can be to kind of have this to work with. It also will, give you a whole stack trace of things here. But most of the information you need can be found right here. Okay, so let's fix that. Let's put it back to the way that it was so that we know we have working code. And now we'll move on and talk about some of these other positive test cases. So we tested just a single pair of brackets. What happens if there's additional characters in there? Does the code still work? Okay, so this one, we want to set it up like the other ones and say, at test with the annotation and say public void. And then I'm going to call this one single brackets before other characters, just to be specific. But I'm also going to create a message. This is, again, a really thorough way to make sure that your tests work as solid documentation and also provide a better message for you if you have a failure and you need to know kind of, directly where to go. So I'm going to set that message. I also just wanted to point out, this here that they provided for you as this example here has everything kind of done in one line, and that's totally fine. But when you're new at this, trying to look at all of this and figure out what represents what might be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to break it down into separate parts. I'm going to say string test data. And this is where I'm going to say, okay, the thing I'm going to test this time and pass in is going to be 2 brackets and then launch code. And then the part where I'm going to act on my code that I'm testing, I'm going to set a result. It's a Boolean value. It'll return a true or false. And this is where I call has balanced brackets. And that's where I pass in that test data. Say, this is what I want to work with. Go run this through the method and see what comes back. And that's going to be the actual result. So we'll say assert true, that the result is true. And then I'll also pass in that message just so that it'll be available if there's an error message, kind of like we saw down here. So let's go ahead and run just this one. And it passed. Okay, so far so good. I think we're going to find that all of these positive cases are going to pass. We're not going to have to do any refactoring just yet. But let's go ahead and keep going. Do another annotation for test, public void. I'll call this one single brackets around other characters. Everything has to have a unique name. Again, string message, I'll say balanced brackets around other characters returns true. Okay, and then my test data is going to be bracket, opening bracket, launch code, closing bracket. And then my result will be balance brackets, call base it on the class, and then call has balance bracket. That's static method calling on the class there, and then say test data is going to be passed in, and then we'll assert true. And one of the things you'll notice is I'm typing things that I already, have right here, right? So one of the nice things about doing it this way is that you can copy and paste really easily because this part doesn't change. You actually set the specific data up here. But let's go ahead and run that, and we'll watch it pass. Good deal. All right, so now let's do one where it's a kind of a mix of characters and brackets. If you had written the has balance brackets method from scratch, you might find that let's go call this among other characters. You might find that, depending on, if you had not yet come up with this process and this particular solution, you might have been, doing other things to try to figure out how to work around where there's other characters involved in things. And so having tests like this might have pointed out things that wouldn't have worked for this, that would have worked for, this one up here. So it's good to attack this from multiple angles, but we do already have a pretty good algorithm. So, okay, so this one, I'm going to do a message, and I'll just say balance brackets among other characters returns true. And then my test data will be what I set up there in my to-do I'm going to do, where code is in brackets. Okay, and then everything else is the same, so I can just copy from here, and we'll just take this result where we're passing in that test data that we defined and passing in the message that we defined. Okay. So we run, so far so good. Okay. Now we get to the part where we're not really working with other characters, we're just testing other arrangements of brackets. At this stage, I'm going to just do a lot of copying and pasting of the whole thing. But I do need to change the name here. So let's say triple balanced brackets. And our message could say 3 consecutive pairs of brackets returns true. And then I'm just going to copy that from the to-do and put that here as our test data. And then we can run that, and it should return true. Good. And then for this one, we're going to test it where they're actually nested instead. So 3 opening brackets, 3 closing brackets. And this one we'll call triple nested balanced brackets. Okay. 3 nested pairs of brackets return true. And let's run that. Okay. So we're doing great. So we have a number of, slightly different positive test cases that we can do here that, faithfully follow this process and prove that the algorithm does work so far for all these positive cases. So now let's start getting into the negative test cases. We're going to have a single opening bracket. And let's see what happens here. So I'm going to call this one single opening bracket. And we're just going to test that And then our message here is going to be different, right? I'm going to say a single opening bracket returns false, because now we're checking the negative case. So I'm going to say assert false, and then we'll pass in that result and the message and expect that the test should pass, because we should get false instead of true from the method. Okay, and that test passed, which means it is in fact coming back false. And that's because, you know, it goes through here and loops through, and when it sees the opening bracket, it increments brackets from 0 to 1, but it never sees a closing bracket. And so down here, when it goes to check to see if brackets is back to 0, it's not, it's 1, and so it returns false. Okay, so that works. Let's do this again, and I'm going to copy this one now, since we've got that assert false assertion method that's a little bit different. Okay, so single closing bracket this time. So I'll change this to a closing bracket, change this to say closing, and let's run this. And of course, this one never ends up at 0, because it actually goes into the negative first. So now we want to test the reverse brackets. We do in fact have a closing bracket and an opening bracket. They're just in the wrong order, right? So if we do this, let's say, we'll call this reversed brackets. How's that? Reversed brackets. A set of reversed brackets returns false. And then I'll just put an opening bracket in front of the closing bracket here. Oh, I said that backwards. A closing bracket in front of the opening bracket. And then we'll assert that it should be false and run it. All right, and we have a test failure, which is what I was hoping for. Believe it or not, a set of reverse brackets returns false. So there's that message that I passed in that helps us know exactly what it is that failed. And we can see that it didn't work. And so we'll go back over to our thing and say, okay, the test is correct. So we know we need to fix our code to make sure it works. So the problem here is that it is seeing the closing bracket and it's going down -1, and then it sees the opening bracket and it goes back up to 0. And so it returns true, because all it's looking for is if it has actually balanced out to 0. The problem is, according to our rules, they have to be in the right order. This is considered unbalanced because they're in the wrong order. So we need something else in our logic here that's going to actually make sure that we catch that possibility. So essentially, I think what we can basically say is we'd never want it to go into the negative, right? In an example like this here, where we had, I went too far, hold on. Yeah, an example like this, you know, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And an example like this, it goes up, up, up. So brackets would equal 3. And then when it gets to this, it would be, you know, subtract to 2, to 1, to 0. It's always positive as long as they are in the correct order, as long as they're considered to be balanced. So really anything like this, even if it ends up netting 0, they're still in the wrong order. So we can say that what we need to do is, while we're looping here, we want to check before we continue to loop to see if we've actually got a negative number. And if so, we know, well, even if it all balances out to 0 in the end, they must be in the wrong order if we got a closing bracket before we get a corresponding opening bracket. So I'm going to change this to say if brackets is less than 0, then we want to return false. So we'll just do that early return right there, and then we're just done. And it doesn't even continue looping or get down to here. Okay, so let's run it again and see if it passes this time. And it sure does. Okay, so I think that's going to take care of it. So let's continue doing all these other tests, just so we have a variety of situations that we can test for here. I'll call this one single bracket with other characters. and just say, a single opening bracket with other characters returns false. Okay, we need to update this to say launch code to match the to do, and then we'll run it. And it passes. Great. Okay. Let's do the next one. All right, this one's going to be unbalanced brackets among other characters. And we'll say unbalanced brackets among other characters returns false. That's what we're testing for. And in this one, you know, we're going to kind of do like a closing bracket first and an opening bracket here. So there's one of each, but now that we've updated our method to make sure that it never goes in the negative, this one should pass as well. Great. Okay. And then one last one here, another negative test where we actually just pass, check for, you know, a series of brackets that ultimately are not balanced. So we can change our test data to match that. And I'll say, I'll just call this mix of unbalanced brackets. And say a mix of unbalanced brackets returns false. And then we'll test this. Okay. So we pass. So it works for all these positive and negative cases. That's great. So let's just make sure that it works for some edge cases. One good edge case to always think of is what if there are no brackets, right? What if there's just other characters? So we can come up with a test for that. Let me get this back and we'll just copy that. And we'll call this one string of characters without brackets. Okay, and we'll say for the message, a string of characters without brackets returns true. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing unbalanced, therefore it's going to return true. And so we'll just put launch code in here without any brackets at all. And we'll change this back to assert true. Oops, too many E's. There we go. And we'll run it. Good. Okay. And then the one last one we want to do is for what happens if you have an empty string. So I'm just going to call it empty string. An empty string returns true. And then we'll just take that out of there and we will run this and see. Great. Okay. So we've passed all of our tests. If I come back up here and I want to run all of them, I can just run the entire class of, you know, the test class. And you'll see here that it's going to run all of them. And it says, it's kind of hard for you to see it probably, but it says right here, test passed 14 of 14 tests. So that's pretty much all there is to this. This is a fairly simple example, and it also really only made use of, you know, assert true and assert false. We didn't really get into working with assert equals at all in this, but I have lots and lots of examples of that in my lecture code that I came up with the library and book examples. So feel free to refer back to those if you'd like to see some more examples of using assert equals. All right, I hope this has been helpful. I will see you in the next one.